You're listening to the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. And this episode is titled, Later Means Never. What I mean by that is, how many of you have said, I'm going to do XYZ later? Whatever it might be for you. And have you noticed that when you say you're going to get to things later, normally it never happens, because later never comes because you're going to get to it later. So if you're one of those people, like pretty much almost everyone, and you say you're going to get to something later, the truth is probably not going to happen. And if that's you, then keep listening. Okay, so later never happens. Right now I am doing the transformational coaching program, and basically I'm promoting it, and I promoted it here on the podcast. And what's interesting is the amount of people who say they want to change their lives, they want to transform their lives, and they don't do anything. And they always say, almost always, well, I want to do XYZ, but I'll get to it later. And if I had $1 for every time I've heard people say, Jim, I really want to be in your transformational program, but I'll do it later, I already know, honestly, they're lying to themselves. Why? Because you are your biggest liar to you. And that's what we do, is we fool ourselves. And the reality is later never comes, because I never see them later, because they never come later. Why? Because they're busy later making the excuse they're going to do something later, and their whole life is a bunch of later. Does that make sense? Is people are so busy being consumed with what they're doing and getting into overwhelmed because people don't focus and they're chasing money and every health and relationships and everything else, is that when they say later doesn't happen, because you've got to start now to have something later. And it's just, by the way, I'm not tossing any stones here, because I also had that very, same broken strategy for many years of my life. And it goes back to one of the previous episodes when I talk about, or on multiple episodes, when I say all there is now. Consider that, because everything you have later, you create from now. And if you're not creating from now, then you're not going to have it later. And then later, you're not going to have, air quote, time or energy or money, which is working by circumstance. And you say you're going to create it later. But if you want something later, you have to create it now. Now is the only time. There is no later in life. And that's why I say, if you say, I'm going to do it later, later never comes. Now, it might come inadvertently, at some point, but I'm going to tell you right now, the general population, for most people, later never comes. I recognized this many years ago when a friend of mine, he wrote a book and he asked me to proof the book for him. He wanted me to kind of preview the book. And the book was about alcoholism. And I read the book, and I'm not an alcoholic, but I read the book because I said I would, and I liked the book. It was a good book. But it's called Alcoholism Revealed. And I don't endorse or not endorse, because it's been 15, 20 years ago that I read it, and I don't know what his premise is, looking back now. So I'm not going to say go get the book or anything like that. But there's one line in the book that hit me really, really hard. And that one line was, literally, here we go, one line: for the alcoholic, tomorrow never comes. So if you look at addiction, people will say, and we have to also make allowances for, partly addictions are chemical. They're either chemical or behavioral. But we say, I'm going to stop drinking tomorrow, or whatever it is, I don't know, gambling or whatever it is, or chocolate. I'm going to stop tomorrow. And then it never happens. And the reason why is tomorrow never comes. So as I'm sharing this with you, hopefully you're letting it sink in that more than anything, what needs to happen right now, you need to get honest with yourself. Because if you think tomorrow is going to come, you're full of crap and you're lying to yourself and you're into self-deception. But what I'm saying to you, it also applies to me. I mean, why would I be any different than you? And these are ways that I learned to be in life. And I've learned through many years, and in particular working with a shaman, I've learned that all we have is now, because no one promised you a tomorrow. And that being said, there is no later to get to. And then when later comes, like I said a few minutes ago, you never get to it because you're busy doing with whatever consumed you back when you said you'd get to it later, and you never get to it. You know, I've asked myself, even in my own life, many years ago, I'm like, how come I say? I mean, what's causing me to say I'm going to get to it later? And observing my own behavior, and most of us, I don't care what walk of life you're coming from, most of us are the same, is that we say we're going to get to it later for a couple of reasons. One reason could be, which is an excuse, and I share this so many times, and what drives me just like, the people, when are they going to get it, is that I know people are going to get what they get when they want to get it. People hear what they want to hear when they want to hear it, and if they don't, they just filter it out. But I look back over time in my own life, and what I've noticed is we either say we're going to get to it later because of a lack of resources, or unacknowledged is fear. And many times we will say, because we're working from limited resources and we never recognize we can create more resources because we're the ones who create the resources and our ability is infinite, whereas resources are finite, but yet many of us trap ourselves living by resources. So many times we'll say things like, okay, I don't have the money. Here's the reality though, is if you want something badly enough, you'll find the money. I don't care who you are. You will find the money. But then it rolls into this. Let me give you an example here. I see a lot of it as people are enrolling for my transformational program. Is people will say things like, well, the metaphor is this. Let me go back here. The metaphor is this. We're going to take $10. And this is the way most humans operate, is they will say, okay, I am going to invest $10 into XYZ. And then they say, you know what? Okay, instead of investing at 10, I'm going to invest 3. Because if I invest 3, that leaves me 7. And then what people get into is the fear of, oh my gosh. Am I going to make make that $3 back? Now, mind you, the $10 thing that you were going to invest in will literally prevent you from actually always working from the broken strategy of you'll do it later. But so for the $10 I'm using, they don't want to invest 3 because they're afraid they won't get it back because they don't trust and don't believe in themselves. So they want to invest at 3. That'll help them never say again, I'm going to do it later. And then guess what? They don't do anything out of fear of losing something, when that very same fear of losing something is what keeps them in the trap of waiting to say you're going to do it later. And what's one step even farther here is that we don't even realize is we want more things. People want more things in life. Mainly they want comfort and security, but they think money's going to provide that. And I've talked a lot about that in the podcast. But they'll say things like, you know what? I want XYZ that will give me XYZ. I want more money that will give me security. But you're going to show me how to make more money. But you know what? I'm not going to pay you to show me how to make more money because I can't afford to pay you because I'm working from circumstance. But you know what? I really want to do what you have. I need that. I need that. I need that. I hear it all the time, but I'll do it later. How do you think, seriously, get real with yourself. How do you think you're going to create it later when you haven't even created it now? Ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. So you're wanting to create a later, and a good later, from a now that's literally, for lack of better words, I said it's a broken strategy, but it's a dysfunctional strategy. It doesn't work for you. Now the question is does that make sense to you? If you want something later, you don't create it later because later never comes. If you want something later, you create it now. You know, a simple metaphor. I mean, how many times have we been hungry and we say, you know what? I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the kitchen, but I'm tired right now. I'll do it in a little bit. I'll do it in 20 minutes. And then 20 minutes rolls around, or 30 minutes, and you're like, I'm still tired. But guess what? You're also still hungry, because had you gotten up 30 minutes ago and popped something into the microwave, or called DoorDash, or, cooked something really quickly, or tossed something on the grill, you'd be eating now. But you're not eating now because 30 minutes ago you said you're going to get to it later. So the question for you is, what things in your life have you said, I will do later? Now, I'm always going to have one person that's going to fight what I say, and that's fine too. And they'll say, no, that's not me. I do what I say. Really? Okay. All the time? Really? And maybe you do. Seriously, maybe you do. But that is so rare in the world that we live in, that people do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it, because they want to create something later. So the question is, as I was alluding to, how often have you said, I will do it later? And then guess what? Let's compare and contrast. How many times did you say, I will do it later, and you actually did it later, as opposed to how many times you have said you will do it later, and you never did it later? Why? Because later never comes. As a matter of fact, we can say later, actually a little rhyming here, later is a lie. That's actually a good t-shirt. Later is a lie. Because later ain't gonna happen. Something, somewhere else I want to go. I talked about we living by limited resources, time, money, and energy, and we use that as an excuse. And you've heard me say many times, let me put it this way. Anytime I say I don't have enough time, energy, and money, meaning I don't do something differently, then what happens is I will never have enough time, energy, and money. Why? Because I never actually do anything to get out of that air quote rut of not having time, energy, and money. So I talked about resources and I talked about fear, but something else I want to touch on here is comfort zones. I was talking to my brother-in-law, Don Javier, one time about comfort zones. And he was saying, you want to know the ultimate comfort zone is dying, leaving the body. Because you look at how you're born into this world. I mean, you got to come into this world once you're ready to be born. You got to come. And trust me when I tell you, you're leaving a comfort zone. I mean, you've got mom, and you've got the womb and the warmness and the protection, and you're surrounded. And then you pop out in this world into a bunch of bright lights and cold room, and the doctor spanks you in the ass. You don't think that's out of your comfort zone? But see, you start your life getting out of your comfort zone. And we have to get out of our comfort zones, or like the baby, never grows. It's never born. And so many people are afraid to leave their comfort zone. And what they'll do is they'll gather and gather and gather information, and they'll get ready and get ready and get ready to get ready to get ready to get ready to overthink it, to get ready to plan to actually do something. We don't learn and grow in life because, see, the only time we really learn something new, truly come to know something, is when we leave the comfort zone. But because we don't leave it, we don't gather new experience in life to learn. And what I'm sharing here is that there's a difference between book learning and educational learning and thought learning and adaptive learning. And adaptive learning is actually getting on the horse and learning how to ride a horse. And the only way you're going to get out of your comfort zone, I said it a bazillion times, if not here, is the only way you will leave your comfort zone is to actually leave your comfort zone. Because what we do is we're like, I'm going to put on my track shoes and I'm going to get ready, as I was just saying, to leave my comfort zone. And then many of us retreat back because leaving the comfort zone creates anxiety in us, and being anxious and anxiety are a pain. And we actually move from pain to pleasure. So we're going to stay in pleasure of our old rut by doing nothing and getting to it later by staying in our comfort zone, which creates more pain in the long run. In my Be to Have group right now, and we'll be opening it again about a half a year from now. This is September right now, September, and we'll be opening it again in the spring. A lady posted in the group today, and the thought was, before I recorded this podcast, and by the way, how many of you said I'll do the Be to Have later, or I'll join it and then I'll do it later and I'll finish, and notice your later is still the same. But she posted, and she was mentioning how living on, I don't know what they call it over there, but Social Security in Australia wasn't enough to live on. And my first thought was this, is how much of waiting until later caused that for her? I mean, how many years of her life, if she's at retirement age, I don't know, she's probably 65, 70? How many years did she say earlier in her life, I'll get to it later, and she never got to it later, and the end result is that later she ends up dead freaking broke because she didn't do something 50 years ago. I also want to point something out and share something. In this podcast, many of you know that I work with a shaman, and that's very spiritual. I mean, I would consider myself a very spiritual person. And I've conducted myself in the podcast, all the episodes pretty much that way. But I'm also a real human being, and I live my life, and I have my real personality and my real life. And what I mean by that is I have never been inauthentic, I don't think, for the most part, in what I brought to you. But my general nature, it's because of how I learned. I'm saying how I learned from a shaman. I mean, and the shaman that was a mentor to my shaman, the brother-in-law, he was tough. I mean, he was, oh my God, what he would say to me, I'm coming at you like a hammer to a nail. And you know what that metaphor means, right? A hammer, the head of a hammer coming down on a nail. Whack, 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 whack. And he would come down on me hard. And he did that for me, and particularly because many times earlier in life, I wasn't going to change unless something rattled my cage, or I had to change, or basically when I learned lessons like something would break down on my car and I didn't have money. But most of us don't change until we have to change. And I'm going to start shifting gears a little bit with my authentic personality in the podcast. I'm going to just be more direct. And if you're full of crap, I'm going to tell you you're full of crap, because all of us are the same. And as many times in my life as I have been full of crap, fooling myself or kidding myself or making something up in my mind, you know what? So have you. And we tend to live our entire lives in these illusions that we create. We don't have any freedom. We don't have any freedom. We don't have the things that we want to create in life because of all these illusions and all this crap we live in. And what we have to do is get real with ourselves. And I think I even titled a recent podcast episode something along the lines of "To thine own self be true." "To thine own self be true" by Shakespeare. And being true with ourselves also means, which a lot of people will get to it later because they're avoiding it, looking at themselves. And we have to look at ourselves. All this being said, obviously, the takeaway of this episode is when you say you're going to get to it later, you never do, because later never comes. So take a good look at yourself this week after the episode. As I've said before, what a lot of people do is they click off the episode and then bang, they're right back on Instagram or Facebook or in traffic or smoking a cigarette or whatever. Digest this. Let it sit with you. I'm not even going to ask for 30 minutes. For you, take 15 minutes. And the next 15 minutes, just survey and be honest with yourself. How many things do I want in life that I don't have because I made some excuse, and in particular, about getting to it later, because see, later is also relative to time, which means I'm saying I don't have time. And because I don't have time, I didn't have time a year ago. And I'm still that same person, because if nothing changes, because I haven't changed, nothing has changed, then I still don't have time. Where am I today? Because I work from the broken strategy of I will do it later. Just sit with that, play with it, be honest about it. And then the next question is, what do I do with this? How can I take this awareness about myself that is so simple that I've been missing, and what do I do with it to create change in my life? And your takeaway is, don't do something later with it. What can I do now? And I don't mean now, today, wherever you are in the world, 10 hours from now, or I'll start tomorrow. What can you do? Just something, the littlest thing, now, because that's all that you have is now. So remember, later never comes. And if that's the strategy you're working by and working from, well, then you know what? Knock yourself out and good luck. And then actually make a note of this podcast number and make a note to come back and listen to it 3 months from now. That's going to be later, right? And there are many people not even listening now because they don't have time and they'll get to it later. So make a note of this episode number and come back to it later and see how much your life has changed in the past 6 months, because you were living in the past future months saying you'll get to it later. And in that moment, my wish for you is like a 2x4 right between the eyes. It hits you and wakes you up, and that you recognize there is no later. There's only now. So thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing. And we appreciate all of you that do. I do appreciate all of you that listen and share. And more than anything, what I appreciate is when you execute on what I'm bringing to you to create a better life for yourself. Because when you do that, then we can create better lives for those around us and the world that we live in. Okay, thanks for listening, and do what you can to make it a great day today. Bye-bye.